Hi, it's Kristen, and this is a Greek mythology reading vlog. So, in this vlog, I will be reading Greek mythology retellings. I have 3 books here, so I will just talk through what I'm going to be reading. First up, we have Clytemnestra by Costanza Casati. This one I think will be interesting because I don't really know a ton about Clytemnestra, but I was intrigued by the Mother Murderer Magnificent tagline that we have, and the cover, so shiny and so pretty. And yeah, this is said to be like a fiery and furious and a myth retelling vivid with fury, passion, and strength. And I love a strong female character, and I love female characters who get like mad and vengeful. So I was interested in this one, so I'll be reading that. Then I will be reading Circe by Madeline Miller. I have read The Song of Achilles and Galatea, both by Madeline Miller, before, and really enjoyed both of those. Love her writing, so I'm definitely interested to get into Circe's story. Circe is a witch who is, I mostly know her for being part of Odysseus's story when he's trying to get back home to Ithaca after the Trojan War, and that's mostly what I know about Circe. So I am definitely intrigued to read more about her, get a bit of her backstory, and yeah, see what Madeline Miller's interpretation is. And then lastly, we have Electra by Jennifer Saint. I read Ariadne by Jennifer Saint a few years ago, and I loved Ariadne, so I don't know why I haven't got around to reading Electra yet, but I think this will be interesting to compare to this one because Electra is Clytemnestra's daughter. So we will see how Costanza Casati interprets the characters, and then how Jennifer Saint interprets the characters. Again, don't actually know a ton about Electra as a character. I just know that she is Clytemnestra and Agamemnon's daughter. And this says that it seems to follow Clytemnestra, Cassandra, and Electra, and I guess how their stories potentially intertwine and are connected. So yes, I am reading books from authors I've read and enjoyed before, and then reading a book by a new to me author. But I really like the way that these authors write, and so I'm hoping I like this author's writing style as well. I'm excited to get back into Greek mythology because I feel like it's been a little while since I've read any. So let's do like a bit of a deep dive into Greek mythology and follow some characters that are like in all of these stories. Thought I'd do a little update while I'm on my break at work. Apologies if it's noisy outside. It's been raining like all afternoon, and so it's like extra noisy because of the wet roads and stuff. I could go set up in the back room, but I can't be bothered to like move my stuff, so we're just gonna deal with it. A little update where I'm at with Clytemnestra. I'm actually like a fair chunk of the way through, like a third of the way through. The beginning was like quite slow, so I was sort of like waiting for stuff to happen before I updated because I didn't have a ton to talk about. I was enjoying it, but it was very much like setting the scene, setting up who our characters are and their relationships with each other and stuff. So I feel like there wasn't a ton to talk about. But a real big thing has just happened, which is definitely going to move the story along. Clytemnestra is going to be dealing with a lot with where I just left off. It's really interesting to read this book, actually, because I'd heard the name Clytemnestra before, but I don't think I actually really knew like who she was as like a character, a figure in Greek mythology. I know like loads of the people surrounding her, because like her sister is Helen of Troy, her cousin is Penelope, and while Penelope's staying with the family is when she meets Odysseus, and obviously there's like Menelaus and Agamemnon are pretty big parts to the plot and relationship with Clytemnestra and her sister. But I didn't really know like Clytemnestra. I know her daughter based on the family tree at the beginning, which is very helpful to be able to refer back to, is Electra. And I have Electra, obviously. This is what I'm going to be reading in this vlog. So I'm glad I'm reading this one before I read Electra, because I think that'll be interesting. She has such a interesting story in terms of like being married and then being married again, spoilers, and like the children she has and what happens to them over the course of her life, and her various children. And yeah, for someone with like such a intense story, life scenarios that she goes through, like don't really know anything about her. So I keep staring at this. It's so pretty, this cover. So yes, I've left off with a very, I don't want to like talk spoilery, but also it is mythology, so like a lot of this stuff is already well known. But then I say it's well known and people know about it, but like I also just said I don't really know Clytemnestra's story. Left off with a really big thing happening. There's going to be some life changes now for Clytemnestra, which I'm very sad about, because like a horrible thing happened, and also now she is going to be forced to interact with someone that throughout the story she has absolutely hated. So that dynamic will be really interesting to read about, but also very sad. And like I really love the complex relationship between her and Helen, and I'm a sucker for stories about sisters, and they're like very close but also slightly intense, fraught relationship at times, but knowing, I think like a popular myth that people know, with what happens with Helen and like getting taken to Troy, they're obviously going to be separated at some point. I don't know how far into like the mythology we're going with this book in particular, but that's going to also add like a ton of tension to Clytemnestra's life because she loves her sister so much. It's a slow one, I think, not helped by the fact that I'm reading it very slowly. Like some days I read a lot, some days I'm reading like a chapter, but I am enjoying it. So I'm glad I finally got around to reading this, because it is one I pre-ordered, and then it came out and then I didn't read it for over a year. So, good going me. This is getting so intense. There are like parts of the story of like the Trojan War, like in the run up to it and in the war itself, that I know very well. And there are parts that I know, like things that happen, but I can't quite like remember what order they happen in or when they happen or who exactly they happen to. And I'd sort of forgot an element of it. But then Clytemnestra and her daughter Iphigenia go to Aulis, so that Iphigenia can marry for like a political alliance, and Clytemnestra takes her there. And there's a moment where they get off the chariot, and Clytemnestra thinks that the air feels odd, and she's trying to work out why, and then she realizes it's because there's no wind. And at that moment, I was like, oh no, because I realized what was about to happen. And now we've jumped 9 years, had another time jump, and Clytemnestra is filled with even more rage, even more want and need for revenge. And I'm just like, oh, it's so intense. But for people who like female rage books, that's like a trend at the moment. I feel like there's a lot of people talking about books where characters are like have female rage. This I would say is a female rage book for sure. So if you like Greek mythology and you like books about female rage, this does both very intensely. I'm like 100 pages from the end, so I'm just gonna like get through it now and see what happens. Finished it, really liked it. I think it was really interesting to get a take on a character in Greek mythology that like I don't really know a ton about, but I feel like the author had such a strong narrative viewpoint that she was telling with Clytemnestra as our main character. And then it was also interesting to see more or get different interpretations of characters that I am familiar with and that I know the stories of. And this, obviously, this author's interpretation, that this story filled in some gaps, like between events that I know about or after events that I know about. So, just story wise, how this takes place like throughout so many years, I thought was a really interesting perspective, interesting way to tell this story and the stories of these characters and how their lives intersect and how the different characters affect different points in Clytemnestra's life in particular, and her changing perspectives or vindication of how she sees other people. But this felt like a really strong narrative of the female characters in particular. I felt like they were very fleshed out. It's like such a striking portrayal of Clytemnestra, like really going through it, and how different she is at the start of the story and the end of the story, and like the themes of family and love and power and grief. I really loved it, and like I said before, like the female rage in this, incredibly done. So if you are a fan of Greek mythology, I highly recommend this one. I gave it 4 stars. Really strong story. I'm intrigued knowing I'm going to be reading Electra by Jennifer Saint, with how Electra is portrayed in this and how Clytemnestra might be portrayed in Electra. They have a very interesting dynamic, very complex mother-daughter relationship. So I'm intrigued to see how another author portrays that and explores that. But yeah, a great start to this reading blog. Really liked this one. I've started reading Circe by Madeline Miller. I've read a Madeline Miller before. I read The Song of Achilles and really liked that, and read Galatea, the short story she did. And Circe is a character I find interesting in Greek mythology, so I'm excited to like see Madeline Miller's take on her as a character. Circe is the daughter of Helios, who's like the sun god, and a titan. Circe is one of 4 children that Helios has with Perse, who is a nymph who's like regarded as very beautiful. And all the other children are seen as like good looking and interesting, that they have like a lot of promise. They're gonna like go on to do interesting things, like marry interesting people, or do interesting things. And Circe is very much like made fun of. People don't respect her. They don't think she's gonna like amount to much. And then she discovers that she is quite gifted in like a form of witchcraft, especially when it comes to like transforming things. So that's pretty much where I'm up to. People have discovered that she has this like witchcraft, and she has used it for like not great reasons. She thought like if she did something that like one thing would happen, but it very much did not, and things took a turn that she wasn't expecting. And so now she's like, what have I got going on in my life? And the gods have like exiled her, so she's living on this island by herself, but almost has like a sense of peace there because she's not surrounded by people who don't like her and don't respect her, and she can like hone her magic herself. But now her sister has requested her presence at her birth. She's giving birth to another child, and Circe's like, why does she want me? So I'm like 100 pages in. So I'm just over halfway through Circe, and I've reached the point where she meets Odysseus and his men. And I find it interesting because that is mostly how I know of Circe as like a character and like her story. I mostly know through Odysseus's story. So everything up to now has been like new to me for the most part. And once we get past this moment with Odysseus, like I also am not 100% on like where we're going, because I don't really know Circe outside of Odysseus. So this has been nice to read because it's like I'm getting a more well-rounded female character rather than just having her
as like a plot point in a man's story. And if I'm being completely honest, most of my like knowledge of Circe and like what goes on between her and Odysseus is actually from the Epic musical. Great musical, great musical. But that is the crux of where my knowledge of Circe and Odysseus and their interactions, their relationship, their dynamic comes from. So obviously this is already different because in Epic, Odysseus very much completely faithful as much as he can be to Penelope, but in this he does sleep with Circe. Um, and what I know of Odysseus as a character generally, he's very clever, he's very cunning. So I'm like waiting to see like what he's gonna do to Circe, because again in the Epic musical he sort of just talks her around and she's like, okay, I'll help you like get out of here, but like you're gonna have to go through the layer of Scylla. And like I don't know if this is just going to be her helping them or if something is going to happen that like turns her against them. um we will see, but I'm enjoying this. It's funny when Odysseus talks about Achilles and Patroclus, even though obviously they are in their own like huge mythology. um because it's Madeline Miller, I was just like, a cameo from her other book. But yes, I'm enjoying this and I need to get through it, so I'm going to get back to it now. Also, like, side note for Epic the Musical, Circe's songs, like the whole, I think, 3 songs that she's in, like, great. Um, the one that like introduces her, so catchy. Um, Puppeteer, I think it's called, and then Done For is sick. I love it. So if you haven't listened to Epic the Musical, go do that. Circe's song is like, I think might be my favourite bit of the whole musical. Apologies for weird lighting and like potential background noise. It is pouring with rain outside and it's so dark and it's not even 3 o'clock. So I've had to turn my lamp on, but now everything's like tinged orange weirdly. I finished reading Circe. I really liked this one. I definitely think I got more into it uh, as I read on, as you would hope in most books. I read like the last 100 or so pages, sort of like not completely straight through, but in a much quicker succession than I'd read like the previous pages. It was interesting to see like where Circe's story went, because I think I said before I only really knew Circe's story in the context of Odysseus's story and like them being together and interacting. So once Odysseus left, it was interesting to see like what happened with Circe and the other people that she came across and had in her life. It was really cool seeing all like the witchcraft and like the descriptions of how she like made her spells and the toll it took on her and her like preparing her spells and the like meaning and purpose behind everything. I'm very much like into witchy fiction anyway, so having like witchy fiction mixed with Greek mythology is like the perfect blend for me. I thought this was really atmospheric, like the descriptions of the island where Circe lived and like all of that stuff. I felt really like connected to the setting and I could like picture everything really vividly. So I thought that was like good good writing to sort of get me swept up in the setting, considering that like for a good portion of the book we are just on that island. And I didn't like get bored of the setting, because you know, every time we maybe plateaued a bit in the story, something else would happen or a new character would be introduced. And I just really love the way that Madeline Miller like weaves through other stories and other Greek characters into stories about other characters. I really like this one. I think I would give it like a solid 3.5 stars. Didn't quite like it as much as Song of Achilles, but it's like a really solid book. I think if you like Madeline Miller's writing in Song of Achilles, you'll probably like this. Although this is a lot to do with like motherhood in the second half, which I think potentially is why my sister, who loves Song of Achilles, didn't gel with this one so much. She's very much not into stories about like pregnancy and then being a mother and stuff like that. It's not her kind of thing. So I think, not that you have to be like into stories about that, because I'm not particularly, but I did like this one, but again, not quite as much as her other works that I've read. But a solid Greek mythology retelling adaptation, and I'm glad I know like a bit more about Circe as a character. I think she's incredibly interesting as a Greek mythology figure. So yeah, read this. On to the next Greek mythology book.
I'm on to my last book of the vlog, which is Electra by Jennifer Saint. I've read a Jennifer Saint before. I read Ariadne a couple of years ago, really liked it, so just since then picked up a bunch of other Jennifer Saints, but not read any of them, so finally getting to this one. This is interesting because obviously we have Electra as one of our central characters, but we also follow Electra's mum, Clytemnestra, and Cassandra. And it's interesting to read because I'm not that far in at all. I'm like 50 pages in, and I've had a couple of chapters from Clytemnestra's point of view, and then like one I think from Cassandra, and the prologue was Electra. And I think Cassandra's just like a really interesting character in Greek mythology anyway, to have a gift of prophecy but have no one believe your prophecies is such an interesting concept. So I can't wait to read more from like her perspective. But reading Clytemnestra's story in here is interesting, given that I've read Clytemnestra fairly recently, and it's just interesting to see how the different authors like portray Clytemnestra as a character and her story, because in the book Clytemnestra, very much quite an intelligent, very, I think, self-assured kind of character. Like she knew what she was about, and she, you know, was married and had a baby and didn't like Agamemnon when she first met him, and Menelaus didn't like them, and that was like a whole thing on its own. Whereas in this one, she's not married, she doesn't have a baby before she meets the brothers. And when she meets Menelaus and Agamemnon, she is very intrigued by Agamemnon. He's quite mysterious to her, and so she is sort of drawn to him in a way, in that she wants to like know what he's about. And so I feel like those two interpretations of her as a character are very different. So it's, yeah, very interesting to see how different authors interpret like the myths, the stories, and like the characters themselves. So I feel like we're getting a very different version of Clytemnestra in here, because she's also
views Helen as being very self-assured, and she's just like the other sister, whereas I feel like in Clytemnestra is the very like solid sister, and although Helen was like the beautiful one that everyone like loved and revered, she felt more of a tag along to Clytemnestra in a way, whereas this feels very much like the opposite of that. So interested to read more and get more of Electra herself.
So I've been reading Electra. I'm about like 100, just over 100 pages from the end. I'm liking it. It's taken me a while to read. I've been so busy lately with like work stuff and having to do like extra hours that when I am home, I just want to like put on like Below Deck and watch something fairly mindless, rather than reading an intense Greek myth tragedy, basically. The interesting thing about this, considering it's called Electra, but we get the perspectives of Electra, Clytemnestra, and Cassandra. Electra is my least favourite point of view, my least favourite character. And I understand that she is like a younger character in this, and she just like idolizes her dad because she only really knows him as like her dad, and other people are like, oh, he's a great king, he's a great warrior and stuff, and she justifies all the bad things he does because she's like in a way told to, like him, like slight spoiler, killing Iphigenia, like sacrificing her. She's like, well, he had to because like the gods told him he had to, and he had to do it in order to save like the whole rest of the Greeks, his whole army, all the fleets and stuff. And like I bet he was really sad about it. And so she obviously is like quite against Clytemnestra, who obviously hates Agamemnon. And like that's not to say that Clytemnestra is like perfect, because she does, after Iphigenia dies, like neglect her other children because she is so wrapped up in her own grief and her own rage at Agamemnon, which like is understandable, but also like look after your children because they just want to be loved. So like I understand where Electra is coming from, and I understand where Clytemnestra is coming from. I think both of them are in the wrong on certain things. But I think I can like more buy into Clytemnestra's like rage and wanting to murder Agamemnon than like I will buy into Electra just thinking that he's misunderstood and actually Clytemnestra's the one who's in the wrong and all that stuff. So Electra's the most frustrating point of view. That being said, I think actually my favourite point of view to read from are Cassandra's chapters. I just think she's such an interesting character, and like the way that these women's fates are all tied together, like Cassandra, Clytemnestra, Electra, but also like Helen and Iphigenia, and to an extent like Polysena, who is Cassandra's younger sister. Like she is sacrificed because of the way that Iphigenia was sacrificed, and Helen and Cassandra spend like some time together and have some interesting interactions, and then Cassandra being taken by Agamemnon, Helen's like, you'll be with my sister and like hopefully she'll take care of you, etc. But yeah, I'm enjoying it. I think like within the story of like Clytemnestra and Electra,
so far I do prefer Clytemnestra, like the book Clytemnestra.
So I finished reading Electra. The last few chapters of this, like as an adaptation retelling, was interesting because it gave like a bit more story to Clytemnestra and her children and how things like ended up for them than the ending of the Clytemnestra book that I read. So I had a bit more of that story, and the way things went down between Clytemnestra and Cassandra as like characters and their interactions were different in both this and Clytemnestra. So again, it was interesting to see how the different authors like adapted those interactions and like the ends of their stories. Cassandra is such an interesting character to me. I feel like I need to find a book that's just about Cassandra. Let me know if that exists out there. I'm going to do some hunting for it because she's such an interesting figure in Greek mythology to me. Overall, I liked this one. I didn't like it as much as Ariadne, which I've read from Jennifer Saint before. I do think Jennifer Saint's a brilliant writer. Like, I'll just be reading along and then there'll be like a line or a paragraph where I'm like, damn, that's some good writing, or like that was really poetic, or like a great metaphor to use. So I will continue to read Jennifer Saint because I think she's a great writer. So to wrap things up, I enjoyed all three of these. I think Clytemnestra is probably my favourite, then maybe Circe, then Electra, but I liked them all like solid 3 stars and above. It was interesting to read stories about like the same characters and their stories but like interpreted differently. It was interesting to read stories that were about like mortals who maybe had some interactions with the gods but were very much just like people, and then to read a story where gods and goddesses are the main characters. And again, it's interesting to see how obviously like Greek mythology, a lot of these myths like weave into each other in terms of characters having a play in different people's lives. So like Odysseus is a pretty pivotal character in Clytemnestra's story because he marries her cousin and he seemingly is like the one of the people who comes up with the idea to sacrifice Iphigenia, but then he is also in a much different role in Circe's story as like the father of her child. So it's interesting to see how different authors interpret different characters. I think there is a lot of like valid criticism of people doing feminist retellings of Greek mythology, and like, are they actually feminist if the same tragic things happen to these female characters? Like, is that a feminist retelling if we're just looking at these horrific things from a different perspective? But I do think within the text, within the writing, like, these authors do express their feminism or their like perspective on patriarchy and stuff in the way that they write other characters' perspectives. The very end of Electra, there's in this copy a bonus essay story that Jennifer Saint wrote about Paris, and so we get like what actually happened in his telling of the story of when he encountered Aphrodite, Athena, and Hera, and the way he interprets the story and the way the story actually happened in like this version are very different. And so it's about like when you have power or when you think you have power, and like in this case a man talking to women even though they are goddesses, how he interprets the interaction is, you know, very different from how the goddesses do. I've read from
these authors before and will continue to read from them. This is my first Costanzi Casata book, and I would definitely read from them again. So yeah, I'm glad I got these all off my TBR. I'm glad I had a fun time with them. I read Greek mythology retellings sort of like sparsely over time, and like reading 3 quite close together has just made me like remember why I love this kind of fiction. So definitely excited to get to the other Greek mythology stuff I have on my shelves. But that is it for this vlog. Do you have any Greek mythology retelling recommendations? Do let me know, and I will see you soon with another video. Bye!